That's what everybody waits for. Make sure that countdown button, because it actually takes 20 seconds for the internet to say hello, everybody. All right, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. I'm Pagitt here with David LaMotte, and boy, it's going to be a great day. Not only because it is July 26th, which is probably a really important day to somebody. It's probably somebody's anniversary, somebody's birthday, some ominous day. But happy July 26th to whomever that means something. And to me, it's an exciting day because David is just a great friend and a great voice, and so excited to have you here, David. And, talk about your book. Talk about this music video, talk about you and your ideas. So thanks for being with us. And David, we often start with the weather. So I believe you're in North Carolina. So tell us what you're looking at out the window in North Carolina.
Yeah, I got to North Carolina right around midnight, coming down from Virginia last night, and it is going to be a warm and sunny and lovely day here. Of course, there are double edges to the warm these days, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm grateful to be able to have the windows open in my house with no AC in the mountains of North Carolina. So
Good grief. Yeah. So you're up in the mountains. You're not in the deep heat of the rest of
that's
North
right.
Carolina. Yeah, right on.
That's right.
Hey, you'd said before we got started that you've only been home a few days in your house, a few days since June. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I've been all over. I was in Ireland co-leading a retreat with my friends Gareth and Brian, Gareth Higgins and Brian Ammons, whom you know,
Mm-hmm.
and another friend, Michael Bush. And we did a 10-day retreat there
Wow.
around the power of story, and which is a common theme for us. And looking at the troubles in Northern Ireland and the peace process, which is ongoing, and talking with folks about that, and looking at how telling a better story can really change everything on both sides of our
Hmm.
skin.
Hmm.
And that was really beautiful. And then I was home very briefly, and then I went to Guatemala to lead a 10-day retreat there for my own nonprofit with my good friend and director of the nonprofit, Sarah Robinson Bryan. And we had a lovely group of folks with us there and had a beautiful time visiting some of my friends in Guatemala and learning about their work that we support.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, then I just got back from a conference at Massanutten Springs in Virginia. Taught a couple workshops and did a concert. And yeah, it's been a dense summer. I did a
You,
little string of shows right at the beginning of
I
that
love
in
it.
Maryland and Delaware, and took my kid with me as my roadie, which was completely awesome.
Oh, how
So
old is that one?
um, coming up on 15,
Oh
looking at a
man, what
looking
a
at
treat!
a learner's permit in the fall. So
Yeah, what a treat
yeah.
that is to be able to travel with somebody. All right, so we're going to talk about this book. You are changing the world. Somebody might think it's 2009 because we're talking about this book, and they bought it in 2009 and they're excited about it. But you've reworked it, rewritten parts of it, and re-released it. So it's going to be exciting. But tell me about Guatemala. I've spent a lot of time in Guatemala in my life, and have a
Yeah.
very soft spot for Guatemala. What takes you there, or
Yeah,
where
I've been there
where do you
30
go?
some times actually. I
Huh?
I love it. I'm there very often. And what happened basically is my wife and I went there on our honeymoon. We earned our lifetime nerd credentials by going to school on our honeymoon. We decided that the thing that sounded the most fun to us was to go to Guatemala and go to language immersion school for a couple of weeks.
Right on.
That was
Did you go to Antigua?
2004. We went to Antigua and we
Mhm.
stayed there for a couple of weeks, and we took weekends at Lago Atitlan and at Tikal, the Mayan ruins, and it was an extraordinary time. And we made some friends. We were not looking for a project, but we made some friends and we stayed in touch.
Yeah.
And there are people doing amazing work in Guatemala, and often they have a lot of skill set that I don't have. They have knowledge of their
Mhm.
own communities that I'll never have, but they don't have the financial resources.
Mhm.
And Deanna and I were looking at each other thinking, well, you're a public school teacher. I'm a folk singer. We don't have a whole lot of financial resources to contribute. But it occurred to us that in our tool bags, in our asset inventory, were the fact that I get to talk to lots of people and tell them long, rambling stories. And
Ah.
Deanna at the time was an ESL teacher and was connected
Hmm.
to Latinx issues. And so, um, here we were with these particular intersections of gifts. So we ended up, to make a long story boring, starting a nonprofit that's called Peg Partners, And we've been working down there for almost 20 years. It's been 19 years now, supporting friends who are doing really good work and staying really
Yeah.
engaged, but trying to avoid a colonial kind of hey, I've got the right ideas approach, because these folks know their
They know
communities and
what's
what's
up. Yeah.
needed so much
Yeah.
more than I ever will.
What
So
part of the country were you in on this trip?
in this trip, we were in a little village called Sanchach outside of Santiago Atitlan, where
Yeah.
there's a primary school that I adore. And my friend Nino Tikkun started the school before I got involved, but he asked me for some help, and we were able to gather up some money to do some good things. And it's just a beautiful school. They're bilingual in the local language of Tsutujil and
Oh yeah.
Spanish, and they're just, it's such a compassionate space. They're really nurturing. And what part of what's exciting about that is that most of the teachers right now are male, and they are modeling a way to be male in a culture which, like our own,
Yep.
has some issues
Yep.
with machismo, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
they're modeling a way to be compassionate and tender and nurturing that is just really beautiful to me.
Hmm.
So Nino named
So
that
good.
school after me, which is both lovely and awkward. I didn't know that it was happening until it had already happened, but
Is that right?
so that's in Sanchach, and then there's a music program in El Tejar outside of Chimaltenango, which is just an extraordinary music program. That's
Wow.
been going now for since 2007, I want to say.
Uh huh.
And then there's a program that's the third kind of flagship program for us is a mentoring and scholarship program for teens, for the poorest teens in El Tejar, to get on through high school and get a little extra tutoring and really the gift of each other. It's kind of like a secular youth group, and it's a really beautiful project as well. So lots of good, exciting things going on there.
Well, that's just great. We should connect on that. I've spent a lot of time on that lake, Lake Atitlan, over in San Juan and San
Yeah,
Pedro and San
yeah,
Pablo, and we've
yeah.
been there for 25 years or so. So
It's a
just
magical
another
place.
thing, David, that every time I chat with you, I'm like, God, I love you all the more. Just my David LaMotte crush just grows and grows. Uh, all right. So a lot of things. You said you're a folk singer. That's how I first remember watching your skills in a group. You with a guitar in your hand. We'll talk a bit about that. But let's talk about this book.
Yeah.
I commented earlier that you had written this book in 2009, and you start the book with a description about why you wrote a separate introduction in 2020, which I thought was really kind of brilliant, from 2009, which a lot of people won't do. They won't take a book that they've worked on in the past and say, "Hey, I want to keep moving on those topics, and I want to circle around to those and see how they reflect on things now." So we'll talk about the content of the book, but can you say a bit about why it felt important to you to rework? The book is called "You Are Changing the World, Whether You Like It or Not," which is one of the great titles, probably the best subtitle I've ever heard. But why did you want to rework this one?
So, yeah, I started writing in 2009, came out in 2014, and you may have noticed that a lot of things have happened since 2014 in
Hmm.
our nation, right? Goodness gracious, what a ride it has been. And the truth is, I'm still not hearing enough of the message that this book is trying to convey in our popular culture. And it still feels like a really extremely important conversation to me. But the basic thing that happened was that I was selling out of them, and I needed to either reprint it or
Ah,
rework it.
yep.
And I chatted with a friend of mine, Deborah Arca, who used to run Pathos. I'm sure you know
Hmm.
Deb. Um, and she was working at Chalice Press at the time. And I asked her, Deb, can I just hire you for an hour of consulting? She said, you don't have to hire me, but yes, let's chat for an hour. And we did. And I was just asking her advice. I wasn't trying to pitch this to anybody. But after that call, Deb wrote me a note and said, needless to say, after we had talked about the book, we kind of were both excited about it. She said, needless to say, we'd love to have this book in our house. And I thought, oh, great, I'll send you a copy. And then it occurred to me that she actually meant our publishing
Your
house. And
publishing house, not her home.
so
Yeah.
I was amazed by that, because I had self published the book. It did quite well for an independent book, but it was self-published, and it had not occurred to me that anybody would want to
Hmm.
put this book out there on a real legit
Hmm.
publisher like Chalice. And so I had never occurred to me to pitch it to anybody. But when Deb said that, I thought, wow, actually, it probably makes sense to write a new edition of this book and put it out there, because it's a conversation we really still need to be having. And a lot has happened, and I need to update some things in the
Hmm.
book. And so that's what we did. And Chalice put it out yesterday. Officially, it came out. So really
Great.
excited to
Congratulations.
have it out there in the world.
And as people know, if they listen to this podcast and live stream, we remind them that books come out on Tuesday. Tuesday is book release day in the publishing world. Like Fridays are for movies, and I don't know, some other
Mm-hmm.
days are for other things, but books are Tuesday. So happy Tuesday to you. One of the things I like about the fact that you shared the story that you had written this book, it started in 2009, came out in 2014. Now you're going to change it and re-release it. Is that says something about your view of change? Because David, there's a lot of people who think that change theory is really just problem solution stuff. Like there's a problem, let's find a solution and switch from whatever we're doing that's a problem to doing the better thing and fix the problem. And I have a
Right.
friend that says we don't typically in important issues we don't have problems, we have a predicament, and predicaments require multiple responses because they're a grand dilemma. And I
Yeah.
really love the difference between a problem and a predicament, because a
Yeah.
predicament means you can't do just one thing. And sometimes the one thing you do might not even be the only thing you have to do or the best thing or isn't going to solve it. So then what do you do? And it's just a really, for me, a very helpful way of thinking about it. And it seems that you wanting to say, look, change theory is something that you're going to keep uh, you're going to keep revisiting. I mean, it's a posture of life. It's not a to-do list. Is that similar
Right.
to how you're thinking about it?
Absolutely. And I think the meaningful and lasting change is often pretty incremental, right? And I know that there's a problematic nature to incrementalism in
Yeah.
for some folks, in terms of settling for something less than justice is not what that means to me. What it means to me is that things do change through the accumulation of lots of small efforts. And that's not the story we're getting from our
Yes.
culture, right? You talk about the difference between fixing a problem and being done with it, moving on to the next problem, and incremental change. The title of the book is "You're Changing the World Whether You Like It or Not." And one of the things I love to tell people and remind myself is that we use the phrases "change the world" and "fix the world" and "save the world" like they are interchangeable. And they are
Wow.
completely different ideas, right? People will roll their eyes and chuckle a little bit when you talk about changing the world,
Yep.
as though that's an incredibly naive thing to say. That's because they're hearing "fix the world."
Mm.
Right? If you think you can fix the world, that is worthy of a chuckle and an eye roll. It's naive and it's not going to happen. If you think you can save the world, I'd like to suggest maybe that's not your gig, right? But if you think you can change the world, you're just paying attention. In fact,
Mm.
it's naive to think you can be in the world and not
Wow.
change it,
Wow.
because everything you do changes the world, whether you like it or not. So the question is how much intentionality we're going to bring to
Hmm.
the changes that we're making. And if you are the kind of person, which I know you are personally, and there are lots and lots and lots of us in the world, if you are the kind of person who wants to make a positive change in the world around you, then it makes sense to think about how that actually happens and how it doesn't. And
Mm.
I think we have a cultural narrative about how large scale change happens
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
both ubiquitous and wrong. And
Yeah.
we need to talk about that. We need to switch lenses, to use the seminary word. We need a new hermeneutic. We need a new frame, to think about how change actually happens, because it's not about the heroes, and it's not about dramatic action. It's about showing up over and over again in community, not by ourselves, but with other people. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah. And it for some people it can be very relieving, and for other people it just mounts the pressure all the more. Right? They're like, every choice I make, every
Right.
social media world that I try to use, every product that I buy, every amount of time I spend doing one thing and not another.
Yeah.
These are all butterfly effect impact. And man, when you get into a change the world kind of narrative, it can be super overwhelming for people. Have you experienced
Exactly.
that as you raise these issues in the context that you do? Because I know the kind of work you do where uh, you, you're often invited into a circumstance for some of your skills you may have musically or speaking or organizing. And then you'll start bringing up some other things too, right? Like that's how influencers do their thing, right? So you
Right.
start bringing this up to people who didn't ask you to come talk to them about change or change theory, changing the world. Do you hear people not just with sort of justice fatigue, but people who really feel like, dude, when someone starts talking about impact that we have and all the small things we do, it is
Mhm.
absolutely overwhelming for me to
Yeah.
think I'm going to put intention behind every small action that I
Right.
endeavor in.
Right.
Do you experience that where people get tired or frustrated or any of the rest?
Yeah. Yeah, I do sometimes. So basically, the good news is you're not powerless, and the bad news is you're not powerless, right? So we do have work to do, and that can feel like a burden. But my message is basically one of comfort, right? That you don't. One of the things I like to remind people is that martyrdom is overrated,
Mm,
right? There is something to be said. I love the phrase personal sustainability. We think
mm,
about environmental sustainability, we think about economic sustainability, but we also need to be thinking about personal sustainability. And part of that means thinking about what you're called to right now, which
mm,
which thing is pulling on your heart right now, and maybe giving your attention to that one thing for a while. Um, I and that doesn't mean I actually really don't believe that people have a calling. I don't believe people have a calling. I believe that people have
nice.
thousands of callings. Right,
Ah,
and that's really important.
nice.
It's not just a semantic distinction
Mm,
because it changes the question from what do I do with my life, which is an overwhelming
yeah.
question, to what do I do next, which is a much more
Mm.
productive and manageable question.
When did that dawn on you? When did you hit a point where you're like, hey, this calling business doesn't work, but thousands of callings and responses to the next as opposed to the thing. Do you remember when that started to settle in for you and when
I
that became
remember
clear?
generally in my 20s, I was thinking
Mm,
just the other day actually about one of the first times I spoke to a large audience in my 20s, and in those days I my message really was a "you can do anything" kind of
mm.
message, right? Because I was young.
Yeah, right.
And I wasn't, as aware as I am now. I'm sure there's more awareness to come, but I wasn't as aware then of the significance of my particular social location and the fact that I had been dealt all of the traditional privilege cards, right? That mean that I don't have some obstacles that some of my friends do have.
Yeah.
Um, so I do believe that it's true. There was some truth in what I was saying. Not that you can do anything. None of us can do anything. But I do believe that most of us can do so much more than we think we can. And we're often more limited by our own conception of our
Hmm.
limitations than by any real limitations that exist. However, that's not to say that there aren't real limitations and
Yeah.
different limitations for different people. And in those days, I wasn't thinking enough about community. I was thinking about solo
Yeah.
stories, right? And I was encouraging people to reach for their dreams and such, and that's good if you're doing it in an honest way. But but I had more to learn about
Mm.
community, about impact, and frankly, I think there was a self-congratulatory kind of implicit story in there that,
Yeah.
hey, look, I'm a folk singer, I'm living my dream, and you can too, and that's actually not necessarily all that helpful, right?
Yeah.
So that was an early message that needed to be revised, right? And and in kind of living toward that dream of playing music for a living, and I mean, I have to admit that I'm a guy who's a lot of my dreams have come true, and I'm really
Mm.
really grateful for that. Um, in trying to live toward that, I realized that that's not all there is.
Yeah. Right.
Um, you need a new dream when your dream comes true and you go, oh, okay, this is good, and there's more, right? And so I've always had these two passions in my life, starting really in my high school years and in college, around piecework and around music.
Hmm.
And the two are not unrelated, but they really are mostly different parts of my life.
Hmm.
So
There's this great
I couldn't avoid that
there's this great
conclusion
line
with
in a
them all.
Bruce Springsteen song where it says, is a dream a lie if it don't come true, or is it something worse? And there's another version of that, which I think you're getting at. Is a dream a lie if it does come true?
Right.
And then you're like, now what? I mean, that is a real dilemma for people. And change theory impacts this a lot when people realize, okay, that's all the change I can do, or I had the impact I wanted to have. And now look at what's going on. Like that's a real setup, as you've said, for frustration and for change as a failure narrative. Someone said to
Mm-hmm.
me once, we were talking about change because I used to do a lot of change theory in organizations and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just based on the idea that, like yours, that change is happening. Like, so we just have to get ready for it. Like the world is made of change at the smallest,
Mm-hmm.
subatomic level. It's just all energy movement. So
Right.
stability is a fabulous fiction that we should all depend on,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not
Mm-hmm.
really how things work. So change is what's normative, and you know, using biology and chemistry and physics and all this to sort of reflect on the human experience. And this person said, well, I don't know about all that change stuff, but I do know that I'm called to love the world. And maybe I need to be thinking about loving the world as much as I'm thinking about changing the world. It was a
Mm-hmm.
really sort of impactful thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is your
Right.
relationship to whatever we mean by the world? And then I was actually 2018. I was in a conversation with a bunch of Trump supporters that this event was going on, and they could clearly tell that I was not a Trump supporter, and so I was in a particular dialogue, and this one person said, "Yeah, you probably love that Barack Obama who wanted to bring change,"
Hmm.
and said, "If you love America, you wouldn't want to change it." It was such an interesting little phrase, right?
Wow.
And then she said,
Right.
you enter into a relationship with someone, and the first thing you want to do is change them.
Hmm.
How about if you start by love? So I have these two kind of competing ideas, right? This one's a
Mm-hmm.
deeply Christian, Jesus-y idea that maybe we first need to make sure we're loving,
Mm-hmm.
and not just about change. And then this other political argument that's like, hey, if you really loved America, you wouldn't talk about changing America. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. The relationship of all this change and dreams and how we live, and then this ultimate call to human flourishing, which I think comes through love. I, Sometimes that all gets mixed up for me. Does it get mixed up for you? Do you figure out how to think about those things?
Yeah, I mean that's a really lovely topic of conversation. We could talk about that for a really long time. I think it's a really fascinating insight from your conversation partner there that being in a relationship with somebody and wanting to change them is a problematic way to go in. However, being in a relationship and wanting to nourish them so they can grow,
Hmm.
which involves change, is a really wonderful posture to adopt in a relationship, I
Right.
think. So there is this narrative that says, if you love the country, then you don't want to change it, love it or leave it, you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
go
All
on and
that.
get out. Um, but I think when I have called my country to a higher plane, right, a
Hmm.
higher way of being, that's a form of love, right?
Yeah.
And I want my wife to call me out when I'm getting all up in my ego, and
Yeah.
when those things are happening, I want to be, or maybe to be called back in. And that's what I want to do for my nation as well.
Hmm.
i
Yep.
want I want us to live toward our highest ideals, and if I'm not living toward my highest ideals, I very much want my partner to say, David,
Yeah.
is this what you want to be doing?
Yeah.
Right. And so there is something about speaking the truth in love
Hmm. Yeah, for
that
sure.
that does involve change. So I think I think you would find, if you stayed in that conversation with that conversation partner who made that point, if you ask them, "Is there anything you'd like to see change about the
Yeah.
country?"
Yeah.
they would definitely answer in the affirmative, right?
Yeah.
Um, there's always more growth, and I want to be intentional about that. So yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's the
I
thing
think the
that's
two
hard,
things
right?
can
Is that
dance.
change is also always a power dynamic, right? Someone comes in and says, "Hey, we're going to change the." You're like, "Okay, so you've
Mhm.
got an idea about how things should be. You're
Right.
going to now make an adjustment, and the world's going to be more like the way you want it." And that's frankly really hard to get to in. I don't know. I was going to say, in a big country like ours, but then I'm like, but anywhere, internal
Anywhere at all.
change is
Right.
hard that way, right? Like
In
we
a family,
literally
it's hard,
fight with
right?
ourselves about changes
Mhm.
we want to make. So there's a lot that comes in. I mean, it's easy to throw all this stuff out, be the change you want to see in the world, all these kind of catchphrases, which your book does such a great job of not letting people sort of just use change like that, right? That
Mhm.
what we ought to be up to is something more important
Yeah.
than just power dynamics, power over or power under, whatever, wherever we want to place
Right.
power. And because I mean, look, there's a lot of people I follow and talk to, they really want to change the world and they want to change it in ways that I do not want to see it be changed. We
Right.
are having a
Right.
very robust conversation societally and sometimes interpersonally
Mhm.
about the kind of world we want to live in.
Right.
And what the future is going to bring. And that also just gets so I mean, conflict is just unavoidable in
Mhm.
these kinds of situations, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, and conflict's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm.
I once had the extraordinary privilege of getting to sit with John Lewis for about 40 minutes for a one-on-one conversation, and one of the things he said to me that is kinda etched into my eardrums, he said, Dr. King used to say to me," and already all the little hairs on my arms are standing up. He said, "Dr. King used to say to me, 'Sometimes you have to turn the world upside down in order to set it right. Conflict is often necessary on the way to justice.'" I think that's right, right? So conflict, as a guy who has a master's degree in peace studies, I think it's really important to say that peace is not placidity, right? Peace is
Mm,
not the lack of conflict is not what peace means. And I'm not really interested in the noun peace anyway. I'm interested in what I need to be, how I need to approach my life, what I need
yeah.
to be doing. So peacemaking is a more interesting word. And peacemaking for me is approaching conflict in ways that are constructive rather than destructive.
Mhm. Hmm. Well, one of the things that I can't remember now if we chatted about this just before we started the live stream, and recording or since we started talking, but you said something about this hero narrative, and,
Mhm.
I've been thinking a lot about that we have this pattern in our society that we have heroes, villains, and victims,
Mhm.
and then you're always gonna find the way that you're either the hero or the victim, but rarely the villain. And it's easy to
Mhm.
take somebody else and make them a villain. And the world becomes
Yep.
quite simple. And then you have this epic battle that I guess fits into some base storyline because we sure love those stories
We
and
sure
we
love
tell those
those
stories.
stories. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's not accurate. Like we need we need an alternative to the hero, villain, victim
Yeah.
narrative,
Yeah.
which we can talk about. Is that something you were getting after too when you mentioned?
Yeah. So the basic kind of, it really is the heart of the book. I'm looking at the hero narrative of change as opposed to a movement narrative of change.
Hmm.
And I think it's ubiquitous and I think it's
Mm-hmm.
wrong, frankly. I can't find any example in all of history where a hero has effected a large scale change in the absence of a movement. Just can't find one. But it's the story we tell.
Mm-hmm.
If you drive to the nearest movie theater where there's 15 movies on the marquee and you check and see how many of them have a hero narrative as the heart of it, and I'll give you my definition of a hero narrative. I think you'd find that it's most of the movies, right? And not just the
Yeah.
superhero movies, but the children's entertainment, the historical movies, etc. All tend to say, or very often tend to say, that there's somebody extraordinary. They're special in some way. They're extraordinarily courageous or smart or strong or whatever. Not necessarily a superhero, but somebody special, different from you, extraordinary. And that person does something dramatic in a moment of crisis, and then things change, and then you roll the credits. And that's how we tell history, even though it's not how history happened.
Yeah.
The problem is that This then sets up a syllogism, an unconscious syllogism, I think, most of the time, that says heroes change things. I'm not a hero, therefore I don't change things. Right?
Yep.
So the question is like, what am I supposed to do? I'm not Gandhi,
Yeah.
right? And that's just rooted deeply in the hero narrative.
Hmm.
Excuse me. So we strip away a story like the Rosa Parks story. We strip away the fact that she was an activist for decades before she was arrested on that day in December 1st,
Yeah.
1955. For most of us, Rosa Parks' life was one day long,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. One bus
But the
trip
fact
long.
is,
Yeah. Right.
she was an activist for years before and after that day. And we don't tell the story of the Women's Political Council in Montgomery, this group of hundreds of African American women who had organized the bus boycott a year before the boycott was called.
Yeah.
Joanne Robinson was the head of the Women's Political Council. The night Rosa Parks was arrested, she was a professor at Alabama State, which was then a black school. And she called two of her English students from her class the next morning and said, "Meet me at the school at midnight." From midnight to 4 a.m., they made copies of a 3-up flyer calling for a one-day boycott on Monday. This is Thursday night. They cut them into strips, right? So from midnight to 4 a.m., they're making copies on an old school mimeograph.
Mm.
They're cutting them. From 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., they're delivering them to the neighborhood captains for the Women's Political Council, which covered the entire black part of Montgomery. And then at 7 a.m., those women are delivering them to their neighborhoods. So every house and every business has this little strip flyer calling for the boycott on Monday morning, 14 hours after Rosa Parks is arrested, without the benefit of modern communication technology, except for telephones that had
Yeah.
landlines attached to walls, right? So no one has heard Joanne Robinson's name. No one has heard
Mm.
of the Women's Political Council. Let me say again, Joanne Robinson called the Montgomery bus boycott, and nobody knows her name.
Wow.
We do not tell movement stories. We strike away the movement part
Yeah. Yeah.
because you know what your job is in the hero narrative if you're not the hero? Your job is to clap.
Wow.
And that's awesome. I love that job.
Yeah.
Give me
Yeah.
that, give me that assignment, please. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's
That's
not how it
great.
happens.
That's not
Movement
how it
narratives
happens.
tells you
Yeah.
something different entirely, right? Figure out what you care about. Get with other people who care about that thing. Figure out what your asset inventory is. What do y'all bring together? Figure out an achievable goal with a small timeline of weeks, right? And work toward that. And set your next meeting and figure out who's going to do what.
Yeah. Hmm.
Man, I hate to say this, Doug. This is a hard thing for people to hear. But you know what changes the world? Committees change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. See, that is, see, that's on to something. Yeah. It's that work. And if you think that's not how it happened, you just don't know what was going on in between the meetings.
Right.
It's
You you
just, it's
you
just the
you
fact.
haven't heard the rest of the story, honestly.
Yeah. In fact, the Rosa Parks story is so instructive because there's a lot of conservatives, in fact, who will try to use the fact that there was a whole movement afoot to say, "Oh, she was just a plant." I mean,
Right.
they're
Right.
like, she wasn't a hero. She actually knew what she was doing when she got on this bus. She didn't move on purpose. This was all choreographed and planned, right?
Mm,
Their idea is this isn't valid because it wasn't a hero narrative. It wasn't one person rising above the ashes and stepping out and then
precisely.
being called, because we found out that there was this whole thing going. Like there's some people like you who hear the backstory and say, "Oh, that's how you do it." And other people
Mhm.
hear the backstory and think, "Oh yeah, just a big con job, just
Hmm. Hmm.
a front." That
Yeah.
and and this is a real issue. Look, as two people that are also embedded inside the Christian faith, Christianity suffers from this story so very much, right?
Right.
Like the
Right.
level to which we've taken the story of Jesus and just converted it into a modern day hero story. And we've
Yep.
allowed people to use sort of the mythical narratives of hero narratives
Mhm.
to capture it as well. And then act
Yeah.
like that's what it is. And what we should do is get together on Sundays or some other day and clap,
Right.
right?
In the
As
vernacular
opposed
of
to
the
like,
church, praise and worship. right? And that's all there is, just praise and worship, and you stop
Totally.
there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
this is the fundamental divide in Christendom, actually, Doug. I
mm,
think more than Protestant, uh, uh, Catholic, that thing,
yeah.
more than conservative, liberal. I think hero movement is the fundamental divide
Wow.
in how folks look
Mm,
at the Jesus story. Because on the one hand, the hero story says Jesus died for me, took care of everything.
yeah.
I outsourced the change to Jesus, and now my job is to praise and worship, and I'm done. And on the other hand, there's a narrative that says Jesus came to invite me
Yeah.
into a whole new way of being in the world. It's really countercultural and challenging to the systems of power that are established, and asked me to join him and live like him and actually walk in the way,
Yeah.
right? And that's a really different story of Christianity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it bears some examination, I think.
It sure does, and I'm glad you're doing it. And this book is one people should look at. I've got a couple of things I do want to chat with you about. You are changing the world, whether you like it or not, is the name of the book. It's now out. You can buy it. You should buy it. Share it around. Tell people about it. But when you look up David LaMotte, you're not only going to hear author, you're going to hear musician, speaker, and author. All right. So can we talk about the musician side of this thing for a
I
bit?
love that side. Sure.
We both have a guitar hanging over our left shoulders.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm a beginner. All right. I started playing guitar 19 months ago,
Right
and
on.
had no experience at all. You, on the other hand, I have watched with a guitar in your hand do things that made me truly believe the hero narrative and say, okay, there just are special people in the world and they have special tools that they use. And a guitar is one of those. So I actually had a whole long story in my life that was basically built on this, that there was certain capacities certain people have, because I do think people have certain capacities and abilities that make them interesting and interested in things and able to do things. Um,
Yeah, we have predispositions for sure. I'm probably not gonna ever be an NFL linebacker. It's just not my gift, right? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm 6'7", so people often ask me to grab things from the tall shelf or help them put
Mhm,
their bag
mhm.
on an airplane.
Right.
Glad to do
Yeah.
it. It just comes with the body type, you know? Not really a hero, just a
Yeah.
thing you do. Um, all right. Can we talk about music? I don't think I know your musical background, but when you said, hey, you had a dream of being a folk singer,
Mhm.
um, that tells me it probably started at a young age. Like, what's your musical background, and then we'll talk about this video that you currently have out and
Yeah.
its role in the
So
world.
in my in my family, there's three siblings that come in a nice neat group, and then there's a big gap, and then oops, there's me. And so in my family, they call me Group Two, and all by myself. And so
Group two.
I grew up listening to my older siblings' music and loving it, frankly, right? And it was the 70s folk pop revival, and my sisters were listening to Don McLean and Carole King and, you know,
Yeah.
really great songwriters like that whose songs moved me, even as a kid. I like words. I was listening.
Mm,
And I remember being deeply moved by this music. When you encounter something like that, I think it's pretty natural to think, gosh, I'd love to do that.
hmm.
The barrier is not, do I want to do it? The barrier is, would that be
Yeah.
possible? And,
Hmm.
no chance is most of our response, including mine. And there were some stories I could tell you. They're long stories, but there's some stories I could tell you about moments in my life that revealed to me that, hey, maybe this might be possible. But I was listening to my brother's Southern rock. I was listening to my sister's folk pop stuff. All that stuff went way deep inside me.
Mm,
And I started playing violin as a really little kid, 6 or 7. Did that for a couple of years and gave it up. And then when I was about 14, found an old guitar that had been serially neglected by each of my siblings in a closet. The strings were like this far from the fretboard, but I I messed with it enough that my parents thought, we should get him an actual guitar. So
okay.
for Christmas that year, mom and dad went to a music store and with a friend who played guitar and picked out a Yamaha that is here in this room that I still
Really?
play 40 years later. So I'm a beginner too. I've been a beginner for 40 years, and guitar goes on forever, and there's so much that I can't do. But it is a beautiful place for me to put my heart. I I I love having guitars around. They are such good friends. They're
Hmm.
always in the same mood you're in. They never argue about where to stop for lunch. They're awesome
Good
travel
travel
companions, if
partners.
you like. And
Yeah.
of course, I mean, more seriously, music does have a capacity to get right at people's spirits through their hearts, and you can say things in a song that you
Hmm.
can't just say in a conversation, and people can hear it differently. It does. You do get a get out of jail free card somehow as a musician
Totally.
to
It's a great
to
line.
engage about things that are real and honest and true, right? And that's such a privilege. It's such an honor to get to have people give you their attention in that way.
Yeah. I've been a pastor for a long time and used for 25 years in a church congregation, and we made all of our own music there. We had in-house musicians that made everything. And
Mhm. Mhm.
one of the things I realized in that context that I just know is true about music overall is you can repeat lyrics from a song and sing along with it over and over and over, and it's actually a good thing. If you start repeating the things said by someone, like
Mhm.
you're walking around and quoting any quote, I don't care,
Yeah.
even if it's one that's on a
The
wall
best quote
behind
in the
you, like
world, right? Yep.
you're like, hey, what kind of cult are you in that you're
Exactly.
quoting,
Yeah.
but no, you're like, oh no, it's a song lyric, and you're like, oh, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool then, right? Like, because
Right.
I don't know why, I'm not speculating on why music is so magical, but it just does allow us a thing. What what when did you think this is what I want to do though? Like
Mhm.
between age 14 and maybe I'm getting good at this, and
Yeah.
it's got a thing for me. Are you 19? Are you 20 something when you're like,
I'm in
hey, I
college.
think people make a living
Yeah.
out of this. And how many people in your life are like, no, David, people don't make a living doing this.
Right.
People do
Right, right,
this and
right.
then they do other
Yeah.
things to make a living. Like how did that all come together?
Yeah. Yeah. There were two particular moments I can point to. Of course, like the theory of change, there were actually 1,000 moments, many of which I don't remember,
Yeah,
but
great.
there are a couple that I remember in particular. I was in college, and I lived in this suite, this little apartment with four guys, and the great luxury of it was that we each had a little shoebox private room. It was pretty awesome to be able to close a door for an introvert in an extroverted world. And so I lived with a guy who was what you might call a compulsive host. And Chris couldn't help but have really huge parties in our little tiny apartment. He just couldn't stop himself. And he was just that guy that he would
Yeah.
invite 10 people and 200 would come. Like everybody wanted to come because he was just a gregarious, delightful man. And, um, and so that happened one night, and there's this huge party going on in my apartment. I'm overwhelmed. I go back in my room and close the door. I'm playing my guitar. And the one girl I had invited to the party because I had kind of a crush on her shows up with two other friends in to defend herself because she knew that I had a crush on her. So the three of them show up at the party, and they're looking for me, and they can't find me anywhere. They ask Chris, "Where's Dave?" And Chris says, "Oh, he's back in his room, but he's not going to hear you if you knock. It's too loud. So just go on in." So he
Wow.
invites them into my room, and I'm sitting on my bed playing my guitar. And they predictably say, "I didn't know you play guitar." And I said, and they said, "Play us a song." And I said, and then they said, "Play us a song." And so I played them this tender song that I'd written when I was 15, the goodbye song. I actually wrote it for my youth group when my family moved to say goodbye to these people I loved very much. And um, I played them this song, and I look up at the end of the song, and all three of them have tears on their faces.
Come on.
And I thought, oh, it was worse than I feared. Like, I actually made them cry. It was that bad. But actually, they had been touched by the song. And I thought,
It's awesome.
wow, maybe these songs could mean something to somebody besides me.
Hmm.
And so that really gave me the courage to start playing some open mics and some $2 Tuesdays at the local cafe and things like that. And the shape of my career, honestly, has been a really long, slow, steady slope. It
Hmm.
hasn't had a lot of spikes in it. I never, popped onto national TV. But I've I really treasure the relationship that I have with folks who give me the extraordinary gift of their attention. So I try to stay in touch. And over the years, that's become a sustainable
Huh.
group of people who care
Hmm.
about what I do and keep me going.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. I normally don't ask this, but I will. Uh, What's your advice to a new guitar player? Do you have
Yeah.
any?
Okay. Um, okay. I'm going to say something super trite, but it's
Please.
true.
Beginners love trite.
Mm,
To beginners of anything, trite is not
Yeah.
trite. They're like, oh my gosh, that's unbelievable.
Number one, keep it real. Like,
Hmm,
follow your heart, right? Like,
hmm,
don't don't do stuff that doesn't feel right to you. Don't worry too much about giving people what they want. um, Try to give them what's real.
hmm.
Be honest about what's happening in your heart. I don't mean be literal. I don't mean be historical. You can play with it. It's fiction, but try to say things that are honest in your music, right? Um, I think that's one thing. Another thing is, I would say, it's a long road. The main thing that you need to be good
Hmm.
at anything is a willingness to be bad at it long enough.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right? So hang in there. It happens really gradually, and it's really a joy when you find that you know something that you didn't know 3 months ago. It's pretty cool. You can do something you couldn't do before. You don't
Yeah.
notice it daily, but over time you do. Um, I guess
It's
I'd
great
start there.
advice. It's great advice. Yeah, and it's true. Being willing to be bad at something is sort of the key. And maybe that's why starting as a child or as a kid is easier because I don't know, the expectations on oneself for a lot of us weren't as heightened or we weren't
Yeah.
testing everything for its viability, you know.
Yeah.
I don't
The
know. Like
the
I
the
think about
lucky kids anyway, yeah.
yeah, the things you do. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right, right. The things that we do. I have a friend who doesn't know anything about guitar, but he said he used to be an ESL instructor, and he
Mhm.
said that the thing is that when you're learning a new language, you talk like a toddler for a really
Right,
long time, and we let
right.
toddlers do that for a really long time,
That's right,
and,
that's right. I
we
actually
call it.
recommend when people are working on a language that they find a toddler to hang out with,
Hmm,
because it's great. They're so
huh,
patient. They're used to repeating themselves 10 times before you understand, and their vocabulary is limited, so you can start with the basics. It's great.
jeez, that's freaking genius. Okay, let's talk about this music video that just before we started, you
Yeah.
mentioned to me that this is here, and I want to play it. Um, because music is powerful, and you have the ability to sit in front of people and produce it live, that's a rare skill that is so important. And a lot of us have realized post COVID how important that is to many of
Mhm,
our souls to sit with
mhm,
people who make music right now in front of us. Like the
mhm,
magic trick
mhm.
happens right there,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah, there's
and
something
we
holy about it that I don't understand, and I want more.
yeah,
Mhm.
and it's insatiable that the taste for that. And there's also most of the music that any of us have ever heard and has changed our lives is not that. It's something that was recorded
That's
and
right.
just came in our ears or we're watching
Mhm,
on screen. So we live in this world where there's, the recording piece. And so I think it's great that you do that. You have albums out. People should know that. They should find your music. You also have this music video, which is one of the important communication tools for
mhm.
important ideas. But can you talk about this particular video and then we'll let
Sure.
people even enjoy it?
Yeah. So the song is called "Look Away," and it's on my most recent record. And it came from an idea that I'm actually I don't know how I feel about the fact that I was well into my adulthood before it occurred to me. I'm a lifelong Southerner. I've lived in the South my whole life. Both sides of my family go way back in the South, and sometimes in the deep South. And I have heard the song Dixie many, many times in my
Yeah.
life, the unofficial anthem of the South. And I can't believe that I got well into my adulthood before it occurred to me that the song Dixie says the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again, when you're singing that song, you say, look away,
Yeah.
look away. And that's precisely what we've been doing for hundreds of years,
Mm.
looking away from the part we don't want to talk about, right? The part that's really difficult in our history
Mm.
and the part that we're not proud of. right? So I I had that idea and I thought, wow, okay, I need to do something with that because that's really powerful. I need to lift that up. And and I wrote this song that's on the new album just in the last couple of years called "Look Away," and it's really trying to speak into the national conversation about race and racism um, from my own particular location. Right? It's not for me to tell other people's stories in terms of their personal experiences of race and racism. I'm a straight white guy,
Mm,
middle aged with a degree and a couple of them, and a U.S. passport and a fairly neutral accent. Right? I've got all these things, and I'm cisgendered and able-bodied in most ways, and um, it's a long, long list of ways that there are things that I don't have to think about that people I love do, and ways that the playing field's a little tilted toward me.
mm,
And that doesn't make me a bad person or a good person, but it does mean that it's harder to see some things. It's harder to
mhm,
see things from the
mhm,
middle. It's
mhm,
easier to see from the edge. So I need to be a really good listener in that way. But at any rate, I also feel like I need to be honest about my own story. And when I look at the generational stories of my families on both sides, there are things that I'm really not proud of. And I want to name that, but I also want to say, I don't want to buy into the wholesale dismissal of the South, which is really
mm.
problematic. I love the South. I grew up here. Most of my favorite people, many of my favorite people, are from here. And there's so much that I love about it. I love a good long story, right? I love how people take time. There is something to the thing about Southern hospitality that is not
Mhm.
always extended to everybody, but it is a powerful thing that does happen. Um, so I wanted to sort of say there are many ways to be a Southerner, and it troubles me how so often being a Southerner and celebrating that is conflated with support for the Confederate cause,
Yeah.
because those are different things. And so I wanted to say in this song, there are other ways to be a white Southerner in particular. I mean, not even go into the fact that there are many ways to be a Southerner that don't include being white, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Right.
to start with. But from my own story, I am troubled by that meshing of ideas
Mm,
that don't necessarily go together.
mm,
So the song is owning my own history and also saying, I may not be exactly who you assume I am,
mm.
right? So that was an important song for me to write. And I wrote it in the Southern rock idiom, which I love. I love Southern rock. I wrote it that way on purpose because you don't often hear the things that I'm saying in that song said with that musical context.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Mm,
wanted to own both because
mm.
I come honestly by the Southern rock sound, right? That's part of my childhood, part of my music career. Heck, I had Ed King from Leonard Skinner play. My album was one of the last albums he played on, not this album, the one before it, before he died. And
Really?
I
Hmm.
played with Artemis Pyle live from Leonard Skinner as well. I've got fairly serious Southern rock cred to lean
Yeah. You
back
could
on.
give me
Played
three
on,
steps if you wanted to. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I played on stage with Warren Haynes.
Hmm.
At any rate, I've got the cred for that stuff, and I wanted to say, and it's not monolithic, right?
Yeah. Well, and
So
music is the way that these cultures that are various cultures in any country, especially the United States, move around. It
right,
is the way. It's. I mean, I grew up in Minneapolis, and we sang Dixie in like
yeah,
sixth grade or fourth
in
grade choir.
Minneapolis,
I'm like, what on earth?
right,
What
right.
were we doing? Um,
Isn't that amazing?
just
Right,
yeah, and classic rock music and blues music and all of it. It's there is a competition of music to carry the stories that we want to live in the world, because and music is really deeply connected to this whole change idea, especially around how do we envision the world and the world that we should live in, because that's one
yeah,
of the things that music, whether it's lyrically driven music or or other music
Agreed.
is really doing is it's spurring something else. Can you say something about how you wrote this song? I'm internally fascinated by the ability of people or how they do it, what actually goes on. Do you remember what happened with the writing of this song?
Yeah. Well, especially since the pandemic, but serendipitously, 4 months before the pandemic started, I launched a Patreon page. And one of the things that I promised my Patreon people is a new song every month. And before Patreon, I was like a 3 or 4 song a year guy and happy with that year. Now I've written 40 songs in the last 40 months. So I am often on the
Crazy.
last day of the month at about 10 p.m. furiously writing a song.
Hmm,
And it has been so good for me to just keep
hmm,
steady on that. That
great.
kind of accountability has been such a gift. So this song, I was literally figuring out, what am I going to write this month, And
Hmm,
we've been in this dialogue for a few years now in a larger way. I think you and I have probably been in it longer than that, but it's been
hmm,
a big national conversation for the last few
yeah.
years. And and I wanted to speak honestly into that space. So I had this kernel of an idea about look away and saying I don't want to look away from history anymore.
Mm,
I think one of the fundamental markers of maturity is being able to talk about hard things, right?
hmm,
And it's pretty wild that it's now literally illegal to teach history in public schools in several states in the South because
amazing.
you can't teach history that makes people uncomfortable. And that just
Hmm,
means you can't teach
bonkers.
history because part of it
Right.
is uncomfortable, right? So, yeah, so I was wrestling with that and I thought, what I really need to do is tell my own very personal story. And so the song starts off, my grandfather's own grandfather walked home from the Civil War from Virginia to Columbia, SC. That's the first line in the song. So we jump right in, right?
All right, so
Um,
let me just deep dive on this. Did you
yeah,
write that line first? Did you was that the story in your head and you're like, that's the
yeah.
framing narrative that I'm working with? And I won't
I
spend
think
too
I
much
think
time
I
on you
probably wrote
deconstructing the
the
beauty of it, but
Yeah, I think I might have written this song in a fairly linear fashion. I think
yeah.
I started at the beginning and kind of moved on through. I'll often write the chorus
Wow.
for a song and then figure out the verses, or I'll write the first verse and the chorus and then figure out the other verses. And I that might have been how this one went,
Okay.
and the bridge and such.
And you do that, did
Um,
you do it in a notebook? Did you do it, where you're typing it in your phone or your computer? How
yeah,
did you physically what were you doing when you're
I write on paper for the first draft, and then the first draft is around here somewhere. But I write on paper. I scratch some things out. I scribble a little bit, and then I move it to the computer to edit.
I see.
I find
So when you
editing.
say I'm gonna write a song, like
Mhm.
you sit down and you get a piece of paper, which you gotta find somewhere in
Yeah,
your house, right?
yeah,
And like
yeah,
you intentionally are like, now I'm doing that thing. Cause I think this is actually helpful for
exactly.
people to figure out art and beauty and change and everything can seem so amorphous. Like it just kind of
Right.
happens and the muse, and I
Yeah,
get it. The muse
magical and
shows up.
mysterious. Yeah,
But also, when you just start looking into it, and like, well, what did you do at 10:14? You're like, oh, that's when I was sitting down and I had a pen in my hand. Oh,
right,
you do that. Anyway,
right.
I find that to be I,
So,
the human
yeah, I
drama
mean,
of how we make stuff is just
mhm.
wonderfully fascinating.
Yeah. And if we want to talk about the craft of that, I mean, the thing that I've really leaned into in the last few years that's been super wonderful for me is a trick that my friend Jonathan Bird taught me. He made a little video that I watched, and he's a brilliant songwriter in North Carolina and over toward the middle of the state. And Jonathan made a video saying, "Look, if you need to write a song and you're stuck, here's what you do: pick a song that you love." Put the lyric down the left side of the page. Write new lyrics to that song, line for line across the page, and then
Huh.
discard the melody. Write new music for that lyric that you've written, and now you have a new song that's totally yours. Right? You didn't take the melody or the lyric; it's all yours. Great. Let's lean into our mentors. Let's lean into what we can see that is
Totally.
good in the world and say, okay, how would I do something kind of like that? Right? Nothing, no shame in that. Be inspired by other people who
Mhm.
inspire you. Great. So I've done that several times in the last year in particular. I think I
Hmm.
saw that video maybe almost a year ago. Um, so that's one little tool I'll give you in
Love it.
terms of songwriting.
Love it.
and especially if the song has a really interesting structure. I've done that a couple times with Weepies songs. The Weepies write really fascinating structures in their songs,
That's a
and
band, the Weepies?
that's a band, the Weepies.
Okay.
They're really, really good, brilliant stuff. I think they actually are no longer together, but um, uh, yeah, Deb Talon and Steve Tannen are the
Okay.
writers. They're both brilliant writers, and together they did a really interesting thing, made several great records.
Fantastic. All right, so here we go. Are you ready for it? Some people are only going to hear the song. Do we need to say anything? Oh yeah, we do have a little context to set for
Well,
this.
I do want to say one thing about the video, which is that
Mhm.
I made it with Hannah Garrity, who's a brilliant artist in many media who lives in Richmond, Virginia. And Hannah also has a story that kind of mirrors mine in terms of family history, and wants to bring that to the conversation in a healthy way. And we really went even farther with the visuals than I did in the song in terms of playing into some tropes, some visual tropes of that Southern context in music, and then problematizing that a little bit.
Mm.
And the images in the song are coming fast, and the entire video um, is dissolving almost entirely the whole time. You have three different images on the screen, and one is coming to the foreground while another is receding.
Oh,
So it
okay.
gives you this somewhat disoriented sense that is appropriate for this conversation, because some stories are coming to the fore and others are falling back in ways that can be disorienting. So it was just a joy to work with Hannah on this
Wow,
project. And
so fun. And this sits in a context of a larger cultural conversation about country music. There, my neighbor across the street said, "Hey, what do you think about?" And then he named this. He said, "What do you think about this controversy on the small town song?" And
right, right.
totally unfamiliar. I don't follow enough
Yeah.
conservative right
It's a big
wing
story right
stuff to
now.
know
Yeah.
who's upset about things. But this person wrote a song basically saying the kinds of things that have happened in the rest of the country won't happen in a small town. My take is, from what I've read about it now, since my neighbor
Right.
brought it up to me, is try that in a small town. It's not going to happen, because around here we got
Right.
it figured out. And it sounds like to a lot of people that it's kind of a cultural argument that's based on race and kind of a segregated
Yeah.
narrative about
Yeah,
small
and it
towns
is
and
a
who lives
threat
there.
of violence. It also starts with the line, "My granddad gave me this gun." So try that in a small town. And part of what I'm trying to say is, you know what? I'm a Southerner who lives in a small town, about 9,000 people. There are a lot of different ways to live in a Southern small town, and a lot of different things that can mean.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Thanks for the video. We'll talk after it, if you're good with that. So it's like 4 minutes long, right? But people get a little musical
Not
interlude,
bad. Yep.
which honestly, David, is one of the things we wanted to do on this podcast all along, is always have some music with it, and we don't do it. So the fact that we're doing it now is it's just so right in so many ways. All right. So here
Right
it
on.
is. It's called "Look Away," David LaMotte.
My grandfather's own grandfather walked home from the Civil War, from Virginia to Columbia, SC. I don't know what made him join up, I don't know what he believed, but his legacy is passed right down to me. Way down south in the land of cotton, stories here are not forgotten, except when we prefer to look away. Rules were written to advantage, so the playing field was slanted, and that's how it is still working to this day. Look away, look away, I can't look away from history anymore. You can claim all is forgiven, you can tie a yellow ribbon, but that old oak tree is rotten at the core. Now the monuments to generals are all covered up in canvas, and some people say that's history they're hiding. But those statues tell a story that I cannot celebrate, treating people like those horses they are riding. I must listen to my sisters if I want to understand, though the story is a painful one to hear. If there's any hope of healing, they'll be hurting on the way. I think maybe we should start right now and here. Look away, look away. I can't look away from history anymore. You can claim all is forgiven, you can tie a yellow ribbon, but that old oak tree is rotten at the core. I still love a good long story, I still love a cold sweet tea, I still love the people black and white who raised and nourished me. But my people told a story, and that story was a lie. And if we're ever gonna heal this, we gotta look it in the eye. Away, look away. I can't look away from history anymore. You can claim all is forgiven, you can tie a yellow ribbon, but that old oak tree is rotten at the core. You can claim all is forgiven, you can tie a yellow ribbon, but that old oak tree is rotten at the core.
Man, that is great. It's the first time I've seen it. Tremendous, tremendous song. How's it feel to watch it, knowing other people are watching it now? Like, how's it striking you?
I'm really proud of it, Doug. Honestly, we worked on it for a really long time, and there's a ton of layers in there. There's a lot of subtlety in terms of the images that we were using and the background things that go by softly. Um, in the background are significant. So we actually made a website just for the song. It kind of grew up and moved out, got its own place. So there's a website, lookawayproject.com, that actually annotates with time codes.
Mm.
When you're looking at this image in this particular part of the video, this is what you're seeing, and this is why it's there. So
Wow.
it was a big project for us, and I'm really
Yeah.
glad to have it out in the world finally. We worked on it for about a year.
Great. Well, we will certainly share it widely. I was doing two things: struck by some of the lyrics that I want to ask you about, and then also watching some chord changes and thinking about the guitar that you were playing in the video versus the guitar over your shoulder and doing nerdy guitar
Yeah.
stuff, which is also super fun. When you start
Yes.
to awaken to a new capacity, you just start seeing things you didn't see before. So let me ask you about the guitar. What's the one over your shoulder?
So that one's a 912C. It's a Taylor. I
It's a
mostly play
Taylor 912.
Taylors. I've got
Yeah,
one Takamine and a handful of Taylors.
it was a
And
different Taylor though in the video.
different Taylor in the
Yeah.
video. Yeah, yeah. That one's a 14. It's a K14, I believe. Um, I've
Yeah,
got a couple that are.
which is a Koa 14, right? Yeah, I saw
That's
it when
right.
when you turn to that last seat. This is what some people do. Oh,
Yeah,
look at the side on that thing. I think that's a Koa. Like just
yeah.
so nerdy, just
Right.
fantastic.
With a cedar top. That's the one I played in the studio, I'm sure. Of
Oh,
course, in a video, you're syncing the whole
yeah.
thing, but it might be my other 14. It's a 914 that's in the video. That's rosewood and spruce. But yeah, we could nerd out about
All right,
guitar
yeah,
stuff.
totally. Sorry about that for people that are caring about it.
It's
So
all right.
Alex puts in the comment the line "The old oak tree is rotten to the core." Great line, and the line before it is "You can say all." I had to write it down. You can say all is forgiven. Tie the yellow ribbon, but the old oak tree is rotten to the core, which is a great callback to tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree, right?
Lots. I'm playing a lot in the song with nostalgia,
Come on.
right? How
Yeah.
is nostalgia harnessed in the service of productive things and toxic things, right?
tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak. You can tie a yellow ribbon, but the old oak tree is rotten to the core. Is that is a lyrical masterpiece right there. That's
Thank you.
that's
Yeah.
really great. Okay, so a couple of other Peggy. I'll just tell you what people are saying. Peggy says, "Great song. I was just having a conversation with my brother about whitewashing slavery." And Dana Watson says, "Wow, Native Richmonder here, touching to see some of those infamous monuments presented in a more honest and nuanced way." Yeah, really. I mean, a great. Uh, this is what music does, right? We've been talking for an hour, hardly any comments. You play a 4-minute video, and people are like, I get it. I mean, it's just it's the magic of all the ways that people communicate and all the things that and it all matters, right? It's not like
Yeah.
we can't just sit around and play videos all day. We also have to,
Yeah.
work like this.
Yeah, there are different parts in my life as well as different parts of my
Yeah.
career. It's interesting. People always ask me to come and do a thing where I, integrate music into my talk. And the couple times I've tried to do that, it's just a train wreck because
Hmm.
when I'm doing a speaking thing, I'm stacking ideas on top of each other, and we need to think about this carefully. And if we accept that, then what does it mean for this? And that's one kind of way to be with people. And music is like to stop in the middle of that and say, and now I'm going to play a song. It's just weird. It kind of doesn't work.
Huh.
And I love doing a concert. And in a concert, I'll talk a fair amount, tell some
Yeah.
stories, but they are really different halves of my head,
Hmm. Yeah.
They have different places for me.
Yeah. I think that's true for all of us, it's curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
David, this has sure been great. Congratulations on the book, on the video, on
Thank you, brother.
you
And
being
thank you
you.
for the work you're doing in the world and the light you're shining. I'm a fan and occasional
Wow, sweet.
contributor, as you know, and
Wow, yeah, it's really a
I'm
big deal for us. Yeah,
I,
thank you.
I believe in what you're doing, and I'm
Thanks.
grateful for it. So
Well, we're going to be out doing it again, and anytime we can cross our streams in a Ghostbusters like way, I think
yeah, yeah,
I think we
right
should
on.
do that. That'd be
Awesome.
just beautiful. All right, thank you, and thanks. We just always kind of give a rundown. Alex and Dana and Deanne and Jim and all the others that were commenting today. Thanks for your comments. Share video widely, and you can go to davidlamotte.com,
That's
right?
the one.
.com. That's right.
Mhm.
davidlamotte.com. Find all this stuff, music and books and speaking. And if he's someone you want to have in your world, bet you could find a way to work that out. All right.
There's a
Well, thank you,
mailing
buddy.
list and everything. Yep.
Oh,
Thanks,
mailing
brother.
list and everything, and a Patreon,
And
a
a
Patreon.
Patreon,
So if you've
which
never
has
tried
really changed my
Patreon
life. It's a beautiful thing.
and it changed your life because people can contribute. Patreon, for people that don't know, is a way that people often make a financial contribution, sometimes just small amounts. Like I've got a couple of I'm a patron for people, and it's like $5 a month or $15 a month
Right.
kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
And then they make special content, or sometimes don't. They just they
Yeah.
can't share it with everybody.
I
Sometimes it's
do.
more
I send out a
exclusive than
song
others.
every Monday. I record a new song every not a new song, but I record a song every Monday and send that out to people. And then I write a new song every month. So it's a joy.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're about to pick up a patron, at least one. All right. And if everybody else wants to go, you can find that over at davidlamotte.com. Is that right? You'll find it. They'll
Sure
find
enough.
the
Yeah.
Patreon there. All right. Thank you, buddy. Congratulations on the book. And we'll talk
Thanks,
with you
Doug.
soon.
Appreciate you.
All right,
Bye
Joe.
bye.
Hey, we'll see you later.